Over the last decade or so, video games have changed and improved in pretty much every aspect possible. The development process has extended, which means more effort and thought is devoted towards developing one specific title. Tons of time is spent, but due to its complexity, only little progress is being made. But most of the time that's for the better. In this video I'd like to talk about a game that truly lives up to your imagination. In fact, the game itself will never be a limit. Your mind will be. Released on October 23rd of 2013, Space Engineers introduced itself as an open-world sandbox game that seemed very friendly from the outside, but on the inside it was a whole science project. I mean, like literally. The game's system is so complex to the point where developers had to recreate their own engine to make the game even possible. V-Rage 2.0 is the name of the engine that was used to create this game. The graphics of Space Engineers are nothing to write home about. After all, the game is 10 years old. And I'll be completely honest with you. I wouldn't go as far as saying that the graphics are bad. Actually, they still look pretty good for what it is. They're just slightly outdated, that's all. When it comes to the overall system of Space Engineers, for you to truly have fun with this title, you must be patient, and you'll need a lot of it. When you compare Space Engineers to a modern survival title, you will quickly realize that the game is very outdated with its UI system as well. The Space Engineers UI system alone can intimidate a lot of players, and I was certainly one of them. When I first launched Space Engineers, things have gotten quite challenging from the very start. Simply trying to understand how the crafting system worked had caused me many headaches. When you open up a crafting menu, whether it would be in your refinery or a simple survival kit, you'll be greeted with a menu that allows you to see everything in range, however none of it will be accessible to you. And that was something I personally struggled with quite a bit. And I would imagine that is something that will impact a new player almost always. Fortunately, Space Engineers offer different tutorials as well as space scenarios for you to practice in and get familiar with. Roughly after 5 years of getting familiar with controls and the system of the game, things had finally started to open up for me. It finally started to make sense. By no means was I becoming an expert in the game. In fact, it couldn't be any further from the truth, but I was getting slowly comfortable with it. The learning curve was essentially like riding a bike. At first it seemed impossible, but practice makes it perfect. Now let's talk about the physics of Space Engineers, because that's where the game is becoming very superior compared to your stereotypical space sandbox game or any other survival game in that matter. The physics in Space Engineers are by far the most impressive physics I've seen in the very long time. And I'm not even comparing games that were made 10 years ago. I'm talking about games that are up to this date. For instance, when you're on the ship and you decide to land on a big asteroid or even get close to it, you along with your ship will become a part of that asteroid when it comes to the physics. As the asteroid floats through the galaxy, so will you. Keep in mind, I've played multiple space survival games, and Space Engineers was the closest I've ever gotten to feeling the realism when it comes to experiencing gravity in space. Not to throw shame on No Man's Sky, but you are unable to leave your ship in the middle of the space and float in the galaxy. Or better yet, land on the massive rock in space and explore it. It's just simply unheard of. But guess what? In Space Engineers, you can. Now, when it comes to the survival element of Space Engineers, they try to remain minimal. So if survival is your main focus in the game, Space Engineers might disappoint you. Although the game has dynamic weather events that will impact your daily tasks, there's no hunger or thirst. You do have to pay attention to your oxygen and hydrogen as well as your fuel consumption, but that's about it. The game is 100% certainly focuses on sandbox crafting the most, which is what it was intended to be in the first place. Having a little bit of survival was intended to give players a challenge as you make progress within the game, and it definitely works. As the environment changes around you, so will your gameplay approach. For instance, placing solar panels while you're somewhere in the shade. It will impact your overall power production because your panels are not fully exposed to the sun. Placing wind turbines and having mountains around you or big rocks will impact the wind speed and the power production, which will then impact your energy production. Now let's go back to the physics for just a second. When you miscalculate your overall ship movement and hit objects, your ship will be impacted by the collision, meaning when you engage in the battle and one decides to shoot your cockpit, your ceiling might get damaged to the point where it creates a visibility issue and you will no longer be able to see from that, or not as well. Also, when you get into an accident and hit a solid object with the wing, for instance, you'll literally hear an explosion and you'll see that wing just get ripped off from your ship completely, which is for one very satisfying by the way, and for two, very impressive. You could just see one of your wings float into space as you leave it behind and as you maneuver through space, now operating only on one wing. And all this wraps up to my very first point. Seemingly, developers wanted the physics to be a huge part of this game, and any other modern gaming engine back in the day just couldn't deliver that for them. So they ended up creating their own gaming engine, which also just goes to show how talented some of these developers are. Now, rumors have been told that they are working on releasing a new version of V-Rage, which will be more polished and more capable, if you will, which will also allow players to recreate some intense builds, just apparently a lot more advanced. And if this engine currently allows you to recreate some spectacular things, I just can't imagine what the other one is going to do. But I guess that would be just a topic for another video. Also, something I'd like to point out that was overly impressive to me, and it's the frame rate consistency. Building massive structures in creative or even joining scenarios where there's just a lot of explosions going on, my frame rate remained consistent and I never had stuttering issues. And that just goes to show how impressive the V-Rage engine really is. Now, I play in performance mode, I pretty much always have, so I sacrifice a little bit of the visual aspect of things, and I tend to always lean on the performance. But nonetheless, it's incredible to see the game perform the way it does. Now, the things that are extremely debatable with Space Engineers and its community is the new content and how you have to go about it. If there is new content or skins being added to the game, it's normally in the form of a DLC, which means you also have to buy it. Now, the reason I said it's debatable is because, realistically speaking, developers must get paid in order to produce content. It's just how things are. For the most part, this is a full-time gig for them, and we all have bills to pay. I mean, can you blame them for charging for new content? No. Do you also wish that some of it was free? Yes. And that's why it's very debatable. In my opinion, if the content they produce speaks to value, and it's truly enjoyable and creates a difference in your gaming experience, then I support it, and I don't think there's anything wrong with it. If they were milking money out of people from left and right, then it would be a whole different conversation. But they really don't, and they produce some high quality content. But that's my 2 cents on it. With all things considered, when you start out, you feel extremely discouraged with Space Engineers. It's actually unavoidable, I think. There's actually a catalog with Space Engineers that was specifically made to guide players through first steps, because the game is so advanced to the point where playing a simple tutorial isn't enough for you to get your feet wet. But as you put more time into it and watch more tutorial videos that were made specifically to encourage players like yourself to keep going, the things you can build in this game are pretty much limitless. And that's where the beauty of Space Engineers comes in. Perhaps riding a bike can seem a bit intimidating at first, but once you get the hang of it, it's awesome. Same applies with Space Engineers. There is no doubt the game will immediately intimidate you from the start. It's just given. In fact, never had I imagined myself learning a game like some would learn at software development. I myself was getting frustrated at times, but once you get the hang of it, you really don't have a limit. What I admire about Space Engineers, it's the special detail to the environment and how it influences you in your gameplay. I think they absolutely nailed the atmosphere of this game. I mean, I was roaming around in space and obviously the gravity isn't there, so you could see me walk around my ship and not being pulled at all, as you would in real life scenario. Absolutely incredible. The only drawback I can think of, I wish it was a lot more simple and easier to understand, but you are more than likely to struggle with that UI system at the beginning of the game, especially when you start the first time. Once you get the gist of things, the game gets very addicting, and it doesn't stop there. Let me know what you think about Space Engineers. What are some things you admire about this title? Do you love it? Do you hate it? Let us know. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit a like button to spread the message. If you enjoy survival games just as much as I do, then definitely consider subscribing. I cover survival games every day of the week. Anything survival, let's talk about it. This was your boy Roos, and I'm out. Bye.